Hey everyone, and welcome back. Before we get going, if you're loving these deep dives into all these awesome topics, you should really check out https.LearnXYZ-In. They have a ton of cool stuff there. Today, we're going to be talking about something super intriguing, something that's been the source of wonder and myths for centuries. The blood moon. I'm super excited to unpack this one.
It's definitely a captivating phenomenon.
So we're going to be looking at what a blood moon actually is, what causes it, why it looks the way it does. And we'll dig into the science behind it, its place in history and different cultures, and also how often we can expect to see one. It's a pretty packed agenda, but I think it's going to be a really cool deep dive.
I agree. There's a lot to uncover here, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see how science and folklore intersect with this topic.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Right.
What exactly are we talking about when we say blood moon? What are we actually seeing up there in the sky?
Well, a blood moon is basically the moon taking on this reddish, almost coppery hue during a total lunar eclipse. And it's not just the moon disappearing, which is what you might think, right? It's this transformation of its appearance.
Right, so it's not that the moon is just gone, it's actually changing color.
Yeah, exactly. And this happens when the Earth positions itself directly between the sun and the moon. And it's Earth's atmosphere that actually plays a crucial role in creating this whole visual effect.
Okay, so that's the setup. But the question is, if the Earth is blocking direct sunlight from reaching the moon, how do we get that red color? The article you shared from LearnXYZ mentioned something called Rayleigh scattering. What's that all about?
Right, so Rayleigh scattering. It's the same phenomenon that causes those vibrant colors we see in sunrises and sunsets. Basically, as sunlight travels through the Earth's atmosphere, it encounters all these tiny particles, air molecules, dust, you name it.
And those particles affect the light.
They do. The shorter wavelengths of light, like blue and violet, they get scattered more easily in all directions. But the longer wavelengths, reds and oranges, they're less affected. They kind of bend around those particles and keep going towards the moon.
So it's like the Earth's atmosphere is filtering out the blues and purples and letting mostly the reds and oranges through to reach the moon. That's cool.
Yeah, it's like a giant natural filter. And the article also mentioned that the exact shade of red can vary.
Right.
So sometimes it's this deep crimson, and other times it's more of a light coppery orange. What determines that?
That's a great point. And the reason for that variation is basically the condition of the Earth's atmosphere at that time. So if there's a lot of dust, pollution, or even volcanic ash hanging around in the atmosphere, it'll filter that sunlight even more, leading to a darker, richer red.
It makes sense. Like if there's more stuff in the way, the light will be even more red. But if the atmosphere is clearer, then we get those lighter shades.
Exactly. It's almost like the Earth's atmosphere is sort of painting the moon with its current state. That's such a cool way to think about it. So this whole alignment of the sun, earth, and moon to create a blood moon, it sounds pretty precise. How often does this alignment actually happen?
Well, when we compare it to solar eclipses, total lunar eclipses and therefore blood moons are actually more common. On average, we get to see about 2 blood moons every 3 years. So you have a better chance of seeing a blood moon in your lifetime than a total solar eclipse.
Wow, twice every 3 years. That's way more frequent than I imagined. I guess because they're so striking, they feel like a rare event.
They definitely are striking. But yeah, they're a bit more accessible than, say, a total solar eclipse, where you have to be in a very specific location to see it. And that actually brings up another interesting point from the article. The frequency can vary due to something called lunar eclipse cycles.
Right, the article did mention those cycles. I'm curious to understand that a bit better. What are these cycles and how do they affect how often we see a blood moon?
So lunar eclipses don't happen on a perfect schedule. They actually follow these cycles that are determined by the way the Earth and moon orbit around each other and the sun. Sometimes we might go a whole year without a total lunar eclipse, while other times they happen more frequently. It all depends on how those orbits align at different points in time.
It's like a celestial dance with its own rhythm, I guess.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that a blood moon, a total lunar eclipse, can only happen during a full moon phase. That's because the moon needs to be positioned directly opposite the sun in the sky, with the Earth potentially in between.
Right, so a full moon is like the starting point for this whole alignment to happen. And speaking of multiple events happening, the article also mentions something called tetrads, which are a series of 4 consecutive blood moons. That sounds pretty rare.
It is. A tetrad is basically 4 total lunar eclipses happening in a row, usually within about a 2-year span. And while individual blood moons aren't super rare, as we just discussed, experiencing 4 of them in a row is definitely less common.
I can see how 4 blood moons in a row would get people talking. And the article did mention that historically, these tetrads have often fueled a lot of speculation and prophecy.
Absolutely. Throughout history, these events have been seen as omens or signs of significant change. And because they're so visually striking and relatively uncommon, it's easy to see why they've captivated human imagination for so long.
For sure. Now, we've been focusing on total lunar eclipses, which are what give us the blood moon. But the article also mentions partial and penumbral lunar eclipses. Can you break down those different types of eclipses for us? What makes them different?
Yeah, absolutely. So a total lunar eclipse is when the entire moon passes through what's called the Earth's umbra. Think of it like this. If you shine a flashlight on a wall, the umbra is the darkest part of the shadow where the light is completely blocked. That's what causes the full blood moon effect.
Okay, so the umbra is the key to that deep red color.
Right.
Got it.
Exactly. Now, a partial lunar eclipse happens when only a portion of the moon moves into that umbra. So you'll see this dark, curved shadow moving across part of the moon, while the rest remains bright. You won't get the full blood moon effect with a partial eclipse. And finally, a penumbral lunar eclipse is when the moon passes through the Earth's penumbra, which is the fainter outer part of the shadow.
So it's like the edges of the shadow where some light is still getting through.
Right. Penumbral eclipses are much more subtle, often just causing a slight dimming of the moon's brightness. They don't create a blood moon at all.
Makes sense. So it's really that full immersion into the Earth's deepest shadow that gives us that full-on blood moon effect. And it's not just a visual spectacle, right? The article mentioned that blood moons also have some scientific value. What can scientists learn from these events?
Totally. Beyond the visual spectacle, blood moons provide a really unique chance for scientists to study the Earth's atmosphere. By observing how sunlight filters through the atmosphere and then bounces off the moon during a total lunar eclipse, researchers can gather a lot of information about its composition.
So we're basically using the moon as a giant mirror to analyze our own atmosphere.
You got it. And by looking at how different wavelengths of light are absorbed and scattered, scientists can tell a lot about the presence and concentration of different gases, dust particles, and other stuff in the atmosphere. That data can help us understand things like atmospheric dynamics, climate patterns, and even changes in air quality over time.
That's incredible. It's like the moon becomes this giant screen projecting information about our own planet's health back at us.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing what we can learn from these events. And speaking of learning, space agencies like NASA often use total lunar eclipses to test and calibrate their instruments. By studying how known light sources are changed as they pass through the Earth's atmosphere, they can refine their techniques for observing distant objects in space, even exoplanets.
Wait, so we're using our understanding of lunar eclipses to help us find and study planets around other stars?
Exactly. Understanding how light interacts with atmospheres is absolutely crucial in the search for potentially habitable worlds. In a way, our own blood moon acts as a natural laboratory, helping us push the boundaries of space exploration.
That's mind-blowing. It's amazing how connected everything is. And speaking of connections, the LearnXYZ article goes really deep into the historical and cultural interpretations of blood moons. It seems like this event has had a profound impact on people for thousands of years.
Oh, absolutely. Long before we had modern science to explain what was happening, these celestial events were often seen as omens, prophecies, or messages from the divine. Different cultures around the world developed their own unique stories and rituals to make sense of them.
And it's so fascinating how diverse those interpretations can be. Like, the Incas believed that a jaguar was attacking and eating the moon during an eclipse, and they'd make all this noise to try to scare it away.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about their worldview?
It probably speaks to their deep connection with nature and their understanding of power. The jaguar for them was a symbol of power and ferocity. So projecting that onto a celestial event involving this dramatic change in the moon's appearance kind of made sense in their worldview. And their response, making all that noise, reflects their belief that they could actually influence these events.
Wow, so they saw it as an active struggle, not just something to passively observe.
Exactly. And it's similar with the Chinese. They saw lunar eclipses as a dragon devouring the moon, and they would bang pots and drums and shoot arrows into the sky to frighten the dragon away. So it's this idea that humans could intervene, try to restore balance. Both of these examples show this fascinating blend of awe and fear in the face of these celestial phenomena.
Yeah, a sense of wanting to exert some control over something so vast and seemingly uncontrollable. And it's interesting how the article also points out that some Native American tribes viewed the blood moon as a warning or a time of significant transformation.
Right, and their interpretations often wove the blood moon into their spiritual beliefs and their understanding of natural cycles, so it wasn't always necessarily a negative thing. It could also be a period of transition, requiring reflection, adaptation, maybe specific rituals to navigate those perceived changes in energy or balance.
So it wasn't necessarily doom and gloom, but a call to action, to prepare and adapt. And the article also mentions the religious and biblical connections, specifically those passages in Joel and Revelation that talk about the moon turning to blood before major events. How have those texts shaped how some cultures view blood moons, especially in a religious context?
Oh, those biblical prophecies have definitely had a huge influence on how some religious groups, particularly within Christianity, interpret blood moons. And especially during tetrads, those 4 blood moons in a row, there have been a lot of interpretations linking these events to the end times, to divine intervention.
Right, it's like a sign of major change, possibly even the apocalypse.
Right, and it just goes to show how deeply these celestial events can become intertwined with religious beliefs and ideas about the future. And it's also worth mentioning that Islamic tradition also sees lunar eclipses as important moments for prayer and reflection, a time to really contemplate God's power and the wonders of creation. So while the specific interpretations might differ, that sense of a lunar eclipse being a really significant event is shared across different religious traditions.
Yeah, it's this universal recognition of something powerful and profound happening in the sky above us. And even today, with all our scientific knowledge, the blood moon still seems to hold a kind of mystical quality. The article mentioned that some modern superstitions and conspiracy theories are still circulating.
Yeah, that's right. Despite having scientific explanations for what's happening, some people still associate blood moons with things like natural disasters, economic downturns, or major global shifts. And those beliefs often get more attention during events like tetrads, those 4 blood moons in a row, which just shows that we humans love to look for patterns and find meaning, even when there might not be a direct causal link.
I guess it's that primal part of us that still looks up at the sky with a sense of awe, maybe even a little fear, when we see something so dramatic happening.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even in our technologically advanced world, there's still a sense of mystery and wonder when it comes to the cosmos.
Totally. Now, the LearnXYZ article brought those historical and cultural interpretations to life with some really great stories, like the Incan jaguar and the Chinese dragon. Those really stuck with me. Were there any other myths or stories about blood moons that you found particularly interesting or insightful?
Oh, definitely. The one that really resonated with me was the Batamaliba people's perspective. They're a group from Togo and Benin in West Africa. They traditionally see eclipses, whether solar or lunar, as a time of conflict between the sun and moon. But instead of seeing it as a bad omen, they see it as a chance for reconciliation. It's a time to settle disputes, forgive, and restore harmony within the community. It's such a beautiful and positive interpretation.
That's so powerful. It flipped the whole idea of a celestial conflict on its head, making it an opportunity for positive change.
Exactly. And I also found the Mesopotamian practice of appointing a substitute king during a lunar eclipse fascinating. The belief was that any negative energy associated with the eclipse would target that temporary ruler, protecting the actual king. It just shows how high the stakes were in those ancient societies and how much power they attributed to these celestial events.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like the eclipse was a focal point for all sorts of anxieties and beliefs. And for anyone listening who might want to experience a blood moon firsthand, what's the best way to go about it? Any tips for getting the most out of the viewing experience?
Absolutely. First things first, you'll want to find a location away from city lights. Light pollution can really wash out the colors of a blood moon. And to make sure you don't miss it, keep an eye on lunar calendars or check NASA's website. They have great resources for predicting eclipses.
Yeah, planning ahead is definitely key.
It is. And while blood moons are totally visible to the naked eye, binoculars or a small telescope can really enhance the view and bring out the details.
And what about taking pictures? Can people capture a good shot of a blood moon with their phones?
You can definitely get decent pictures with a smartphone, especially if you can adjust the settings manually. But for truly stunning images, a DSLR camera with a tripod is the way to go. Just be prepared to experiment a bit with exposure settings to get the perfect shot.
That's great advice. And I have to say, the FAQs section at the end of the LearnXYZ article is really helpful. It covers a lot of those practical questions about visibility, safety, and just clears up some common misconceptions.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great resource for reinforcing the basics. It reiterates that blood moons are safe to observe directly, that they're more common than total solar eclipses, and that they're visible over a much wider area. Just good, solid information.
So what have we learned today? Well, we've discovered that blood moons are more than just stunning celestial displays. They're a blend of science, history, culture, and even a bit of mystery.
It's a perfect example of how something in the natural world can spark wonder, fear, and everything in between. And even today, as we understand the science behind it, the blood moon still holds this power to connect us to something larger than ourselves.
It's like this beautiful reminder of the dynamic nature of the universe and how differently we humans have interpreted these celestial events throughout history. Makes you think about all the other natural phenomena that still hold this kind of dual existence, the rational scientific explanations alongside these captivating folk tales and myths.
It's a reminder that we're always looking for meaning, for connections, even in the stars.
It definitely is. So for all you curious listeners out there, if you're eager to learn more about blood moons, other celestial wonders, or just about anything that sparks your curiosity, be sure to visit https://learnxyz.in. They have an incredible collection of articles, videos, and all kinds of fascinating resources to keep your mind engaged. We encourage you to visit the site, and if you enjoy this deep dive into the blood moon, please like this podcast or video and subscribe to our channel. We love taking these deep dives with you, and we have so much more to explore. Thank you for joining us.